Hey guys, welcome back. So now we are getting back into Shang-Chi, and I say getting back, but this is a new series, which also continues after the 2020 miniseries that we covered not too long ago, where we talked about Shang-Chi fulfilling his destiny and becoming the supreme commander of the Five Weapons Society, which was the most recent and significant change that has now kicked off Shang-Chi versus the Marvel Universe. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so this initially starts off with what seems to be a standoff between Spider-Man, Shang-Chi, and his little sister, Esme. But even with it starting like this, it immediately then jumps back to a point that was earlier this same night, and with doing this, it gives us the how did we get here kind of build up. Because when we jump back to earlier that night, we see that Shang has finally gone on a date with Delilah Wang, who's the niece of Grandma Wang that we'd seen Shang meet in issue 1 of the 2020 miniseries. But with things jumping off so early in that series, he really didn't pay her much attention, and also because he thought she wouldn't be able to handle like all the craziness going on in his life. But when he got back and he then realized that she worked in superhuman law, then he was like, okay, well maybe she can handle some of this crazy stuff. And really it was from there where Shang was like, okay, I'm gonna give her a call, I'm gonna give this thing a shot. But also, while they're on their first date, Shang's newly found little sister Esme, she's blowing up his phone because she's pretty much just bored out on a stakeout. But this is another thing that just comes from the follow-up of the 2020 miniseries, because when that concluded, Shang had become the supreme commander and leader of the Five Weapons Society, stepping into the former position of his deceased father. And with Shang becoming the new supreme commander, he's also been using all of these newfound resources in order to clean up a lot of the crime and the damage that had come from his father prior to this point, which is also why they're here in New York now versus San Francisco like we'd seen before. But at this point, Shang's little sister Esme, she's blowing up his phone because Shang asked her to stake out one of the drug ring's major runners, and she's blowing Shang up because she's practically begging to stab this dude just to speed up the process. And of course he tells her no, but then she's like, well, if I stab him in the hand, he won't die. But it gets crazy to the point to where Shang has to turn off his phone so he can focus on his date with Delilah. But then the runner that Esme was supposed to be staking out and following, like suddenly his face just comes smashing against the window, which was clearly done by Esme in effectively ending Shang's date with Delilah. But as soon as Esme gets here, she's getting on Shang for not taking his new position as Supreme Commander seriously, which really isn't the case, rather than Esme just being in combat mode all the time. To where on top of that, she's also very dedicated to the Five Weapons Society, and really because it's all she's known her whole life. But as a result of all of this, she's always dialed to 11 like all the time. But while they're going back and forth, this runner, he pulls a package out of his pocket, and from that package he gets this mysterious root, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But without warning, he just explodes at Shang with like these Yeti claws. But because Shang stays ready, he just steps to the side and kicks dude in the head, and just like that the fight's over. But when he falls down, Esme finds what she believes to be a toy spider on his heel, which immediately we know it's a spider tracer. But for Esme, she's never seen Spider-Man up close, like she's only seen his videos on the internet. And immediately Shang tries to tell Esme what it is because he knows Spider-Man from the Avengers, from Spider Island. But as soon as she sees the runner move, she tells Shang like, this dude's still alive, you didn't kill him. And when Shang responds like the dude was too slow and he didn't see him as a threat or as any real danger, I just seen that, I was like, oh man, like I thought he was dangerous and fast, like my mistake. But also because he essentially attempted to assassinate the Supreme Commander of the Five Weapons Society, which is an offense that is punishable by death, Esme then gets ready to stab this dude in the neck, but then she's quickly stopped by Spider-Man. And when he gets there, like for Esme, this is her first time meeting Spider-Man in person. And when she sees him, she's like, wow, are you Spider-Man? My friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? And she goes on to let him know that she loves watching videos of him on the internet, but with meeting him here, because he stole her dagger, she goes to stab him with another one. And Spider-Man's just like, well, clearly you got plenty of those. And because of that, he just webs her up. And when this happens, Shang, he tells Esme to stand down first of all, but then he orders her to not call him Brother Hand or mention any of the Supreme Commander stuff, because for Shang, spreading the word that he's taking his father's position is just gonna raise more questions than what he cares to get into at the moment. But with catching up with Spider-Man, he introduces his sister Esme, who prefers to go by the name Deadly Dagger, and already like with just meeting Spider-Man, and aside from trying to kill him, she's telling him his web fluid feels like snot, like she's really making the first impression like right off the bat. But when Shang gives Spider-Man back his spider tracer, Spider-Man lets him know that he's tracking down a weapons ring, and Shang tells him that he's chasing down a drug ring. And with Spider-Man immediately thinking that the two are likely connected, he asks Shang if they could team up, but Shang says no because he doesn't want Spider-Man to know how close this runs to himself and his family. So to kind of brush it off, he tells Spider-Man that, it's not likely that these two things overlap, but even still, Peter's like, that's fine, I'll help you with yours, you help me with mine, and either way it turns out, it works for me. And it immediately puts Shang in this weird position of like, okay, we gotta bring Spider-Man now. But from here, they then head over to a traditional Chinese medicine shop to where the lead on this location they had got from the runner that Esme had caught earlier. And as soon as they get there, Shang tells Spider-Man, hey, thanks for the help, we'll take it from here. And Spider-Man's like, what help? Like, all I did was follow y'all here. And as soon as Spider-Man's like, he's gonna take a look around the perimeter and see what he can find, at first Shang's like, no, but then he's like, okay, I'm gonna go with you. Because once again, Shang is trying to handle this whole situation like really low key and also on his own, because of his connections and his new position, making him look real questionable right now. But of course, for Esme, she doesn't stay on the roof, she goes inside the front door. And when she does, she confronts the owner from jump. And she tells him like, listen, I know this shop is a front for a drug ring. And she introduces herself as Deadly Dagger from the Five Weapons Society. And she tells this guy that the Supreme Commander wants this place shut down. Cause once again, she only got one mode and it's all the way turned up. Always. But then it's here with the shop owner. He politely asks Esme if he could tell her how this shop had came to be, because he wants to be transparent but also assure Esme that this place isn't like a cover-up for narcotics. And when he tells her the story, he lets her know that long ago in China, he was a lowly servant for a very rich and powerful man, but everything changed when he came across the carcass of a Yuren, which he also describes to her as like a Chinese Yeti. But with finding this carcass, he showed it to his master, to where after that he used the DNA from this creature to create the Yuren root. But also because his master, who we'll talk about more in a little bit as well, he was very much into these weird experiments. And because of that, he became this guy's biggest patron, and that's when he moved to New York while using his creation as the cornerstone of his business. But he also expresses that he was heavily fascinated by this creature because it always made him think of a man who desired to be an animal. And for him, he really connected with that idea because most of his life he was a lowly servant who always desired to be something else. And with telling this story to Esme, it's here where he opens up like full transparency mode, letting her know that his master was Zhang Zhu, but also that he's known as King Wildman. But then it's here where we jump back over to Shang and Peter. And while they're searching the perimeter, they're also catching up. And with Peter asking about Shang's younger sister, it's here where he finds out that it's just recently that they've come together. But also Peter tries to make conversation and he tells Shang like how important family is to him and how he doesn't know where he would be without their example. And it kind of made me smirk because there's a ton of what ifs and alternate realities that lean into the idea of Spider-Man doing or being something different, and of which we talked about a few here and there lately. But all he really mentions is that he possibly still be wrestling, which would be an interesting story that I'd love to read. But with even getting into this conversation, Shang wants to change the topic real quick because for him the conversation of family is really complicated, and it's because of that where he changes the topic and he asks Spider-Man if he's been practicing the fighting style that they made together called the Way of the Spider, which again is a call back to Spider Island when everybody got spider powers and Peter lost his spider sense and he needed Shang's help to learn martial arts in order to compensate. And he admits to Shang like ever since he got his spider sense back, he really hadn't been practicing, but Shang lets him know like practicing will actually make his spider sense stronger. But also as they make their way in, they find like a ton of these guys with a bunch of like the Yuren root, but of course they don't know exactly what they're looking at here. But nonetheless, it looks sketchy because these guys also got a ton of guns on them. But when they make their way inside and they see this, Peter then inadvertently trips a motion sensor, which is something that his spider sense doesn't pick up. And right away these guys just unload on the both of them. And immediately Peter knows. This is what Shang was talking about when he was telling Peter like he should still be practicing the Way of the Spider and how it would benefit him by enhancing his spider senses, and he could then avoid falling into situations like this. But even still, they handled these guys pretty quickly because Spider-Man just makes this huge web and Shang, he just goes around kicking people into the web, catching them like flies. But also with doing this and having all these guys stuck in this web, Peter treats them pretty much like a focus group and he asks them like, hey, how would you describe my webbing? And you can tell like because Esme said that it feels like snot earlier, and because of that, Peter, he's kind of having a Ray J moment to where he's a bit sensitive about his product, because before he more or less shook it off with like the I don't care, but then again like here you can tell he really does, which as you should for any product you make. But at the same time, like webbing wasn't designed for comfort. But then right after this, Esme sends King Wildman crashing through a wall, and with doing so she fills them in on how this root is turning people into monsters. But then also right away King Wildman's like, wait, you're the new Supreme Commander. And Shang, he reluctantly confirms, which then throws Spider-Man because he's like, wait, Commander what? And when he tries to help King Wildman up, he puts a urine root on Spider-Man's face, and right away Spider-Man transforms into a Hulk-sized spider hybrid of one of these creatures. And this isn't one of those things that like sticks around like for a long time, but when it happens it is quite the problem, because on top of the spider strength, he also has the strength of a Chinese Bigfoot with 6 arms, so now he can also do whatever a urine can, who are also said to be fast already, so just take that and put that on top of Spider-Man. But while they're trying to hold him off, like Esme, Esme tells Shang, like, just hold his mouth open and I'll slit his throat from the inside. And when I seen that, I was like, wait a minute, because I immediately started thinking of what Deadpool said, because somebody need to go and drop this little girl off over on Lazarus Island or something, and just let her get it all out of her system. But then it's here where Shang tells her that he has a better idea, fortunately, and he lets her know next time he shoots his web that they should catch it and use that to constrain him. And when they do this, Shang lets Esme know that the webbing feels more like chewing gum rather than snot, but she's pretty much got her mind made up on her review. But with them getting Spider-Man tied down, they're able to take the urine root off of his face, which then immediately causes him to turn back to normal. But even with him changing back, he's mad weak right now. And I mean, like, he can still speak and communicate, but like he can't exactly do whatever a spider can at the moment. And this is pretty important because when he gathers himself enough to ask them if they've called the police yet, he then hears Esme point out that these crates have the sign of the 5-Weapon Society on the side of them. And when Spider-Man hears that, he kind of puts 2 and 2 together here. But when he asks Shang to clear it up, Shang just tells him like it's trivial matters. And right away Esme goes off, because she believes that this whole time Shang has just been ashamed of his family and ashamed of her. And it really pins Shang in this awkward place because Esme's only known doing and being one thing her entire life. And because of that, she doesn't understand the complexities of balancing relationships or dealing with politics with different groups like Shang has, and he's still even trying to figure it out, because aside from him being the new Supreme Commander, he's trying to reshape an organization that has slipped into corruption over the course of centuries, while also still being like an open door Avenger, so where on top of that, he's recently gotten back on the dating scene, and not to mention his new discovered siblings who he's trying to get to know and build relationships with, and because of that, his life status is just, it's complicated. And his sister, she still has much to learn about the balancing act of being an adult. But then also for Shang, when Peter finds out that all of this stuff is connected to Shang's family and his organization, and Shang just tells Spider-Man the shortest version of it, but also he lets him know as Supreme Commander, he claims everything in this place, and he just orders Esme to call in the Warriors of the Deadly Dagger, and they roll through super quick like a moving company, like, and they just clean that place out. And they take every trace of the urine root, which is more or less King Wildman's life's work. But before Shang leaves, Peter's not exactly like 100% understanding like what's going on here, or what exactly just happened. And because of that, he asks Shang, like, if nothing else, he needs to know, like, are you still one of us? Are you still one of the good guys? And in response, Shang then asks Spider-Man, what does your spider sense tell you? And when he says this, you can tell Peter just like, come on bro, you just gonna hit me with that again? But then right after Shang leaves, we then catch up with King Wildman, who's made his way across the Chinatown area, and he's clearly upset because Shang-Chi shut down his life's work in just one night. But then on top of that, he also feels betrayed because prior to building his organization, he had spent much of his life serving under the previous Supreme Commander. So he's mildly devastated, to put it generously. But then when we see him run into a shadowy figure who makes him an offer, that then leaves us with a very interesting cliffhanger as far as who this is and what's to come. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or over on Discord, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.